Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Trumos Pedig Beis Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Chaf Aleph, starting Mamish on top of the Amid, when the Gemara is referring back to the next case of the Mishnah on Halacha Aleph, that Hama'aser or Hamavashel b'Shabbos, being Ma'aser, separating tithings on Shabbos, is certainly an Isur D'Rabbanan, very similar to the topic we learned yesterday of Tfilas Kalim, that even though halachically one is not allowed to eat from produce prior to tithing it, it's tevel, chayv misa b'dei shamayim. Nevertheless, its rectification, which happens through separating tithing, is not something that's discernible, unlike the biblical prohibition of being misaken a keli, where the keli is physically broken and you physically fix it, and you can see what you did. Here it's a doing that doesn't physically, in a way that's discernible to the eye, affect the produce, and indeed it's asur midrabanan, and the Mishnah joins together. If a person was ma'aser on Shabbos, or if a person cooked b'Shabbos, l'chu'ura, cooking on Shabbos is referring to cooking on Shabbos. I'll explain soon what I mean with that, which is an isur d'oraisa. And we mentioned already in the Mishnah, why would the Mishnah put together a D'Rabbanan and the D'Oraisa? We'll see right away the reason why the Mishnah does it. Here again, we're machalik, we differentiate between shoygeg and mezid, that post facto, if one did it b'shoygeg, however you'll define shoygeg, yoichal, says the Mishnah, you can actually eat from that produce on Shabbos, and if a person, God forbid, did it b'mezid, then loy yoichal. Today will be a Hilchos Shabbos day. First thing the Gemara is going to establish, because of the juxtaposition of Hama'aser v'Hamavashel, that the Mishnah is dafke talking about cooking in a way where the person violated an Isur D'Oraisa, which is the person put food on the fire on Shabbos. However, if there's going to be a violation of Bishul Midrabanan, and the case that we will be talking about for the entire daf today is something that we learned in the beginning of Pedig Kira, right, in Masechta Shabbos, and that is called Shehiyah. Shehiyah means, Chavre, do you remember that if I'm going to put food on the fire prior to Shabbos, and I'm going to leave it on the fire on Shabbos, one might have thought that there's absolutely no problem with it, right, because I did my act before Shabbos. It's like I can light a candle before Shabbos and actually benefit from that candle on Shabbos because I lit it before Shabbos. Nevertheless, the Chachamim were afraid, Shema yechate b'gecholim, that if food that's not fully cooked, that will become ready in a relatively short amount of time, which means nach Friday night, will be left on the fire without us doing something to the fire, which would remind us that you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos because of people's habit. Whenever they walked by the kitchen stove during the week, especially those days, they would stoke the coals to make sure the coals don't go out, for the food not to get ruined, or for the flame of the coals then to remain more or less on the same temperature. So Shema Yechate B'Gecholim, say the Chachamim, that let me use today's words, without putting a blech on the fire under the pot, you can't leave a pot on the fire the way the fire normally is. That's an Isur Midrabanan. And if a person violated that Isur Midrabanan, says the Gemara, we will not differentiate between Shoygeg and Mezid. They would both have the same rule. Now in the Bavli Noch, we learned Tu Amoraim. What would be the same rule? People jump out. If it's only an Isur Midrabanan, then not only is Shoygeg Yoichal, even Mezid Yoichal. There was such an opinion in the Bavli. And then we learned in the Bavli the opposite. That, when it comes to Isur D'Oraisa, everyone understands the seriousness of an Isur D'Oraisa. Very rare that someone knowingly will, God forbid, cook on Shabbos. So they can, b'mezid lo yoichal, b'shoygeg yoichal. But when it comes to an Isur D'Rabbanan, some people might have a very wrong attitude for rabbinic law, and they're going to actually do it b'mezid and say they did it b'shoygeg. So therefore, shoygig and mezid both lo yoichel. That is what we learned in the Bavli. And here we'll have a very similar, on the Amid Beis already, description of the evolution of, we went initially, of if someone violates an Isur Bishul Midarabanan, like in the case of Shehiyah, putting food on the fire when the food is not fully cooked before Shabbos. Food will become ready Friday night. I'm saying these nuances because if you have basar chai, if you have a very raw piece of meat and you put it on the blech, you put it on the fire right before Shabbos, since it takes many hours for that meat to become ready, there is no fear of shema yechata b'gechalim because people leave it and they forget about it. There, you don't have to put up a blech, at least not in the times of Chazal. But if a person violated the Nisr Darabanan, bottom line, ultimately, they actually went to be more machmer, chamurim, divrei soifrim and divrei toira, that both b'shoigig and b'mezid is lo yoichel. Now, being that today's daf is all about Hilchos Shabbos, and we already spoke it out on the Mishnah, this is a very relevant topic. The emes, it's not only bishul related. One of the ways that this is referred to in halach is called Maisa Shabbos. If someone did something on Shabbos in violation of Shabbos, but we're speaking about bishul, so we'll speak about bishul. What happens if someone cooked food on Shabbos when they were over an Isur Doiraisa? So really, it's a four-way machloikas tanoim. It's not so simple. You know, whether you could eat it, whether you have to wait until after Shabbos, whether you have to wait until after Shabbos, and noch add bichdei sheyei asu, the time it would have taken you to begin its process after Shabbos. Then we also differentiate between the violator and other people, as we will see. Maybe you cannot eat it because you did the violation. Other people can eat it. Maybe you can never eat it. Other people can eat it after Shabbos. There are four opinions. Our Mishnah simplifies everything. The Mishnah simply says that if a person cooked food on Shabbos, b'shoigig, you can eat it. B'mezid, if you can eat it, then anyone can eat it. You can eat it. Other people can eat it. B'mezid, you can never eat it. Other people, not never. You cannot eat it on Shabbos. Other people cannot eat it on Shabbos. And as we will see that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir, which is the most lenient opinion, and we're going to thoroughly go through all of the other opinions. And at the end, we're going to go to what we learned in the beginning of this topic in the Bavli regarding Shehiyah. For those who just came very late, I'll repeat it in a moment, that there is a machlokes between Hananya and the Chachamim. Hananya says that if the food reached Kemaichel ben Derusoi, if the food reached a minimum amount of being ready, whether it's half ready or even only a third ready, and the Ganav ben Drusoi, when he was on the run and he didn't want to get caught and he never stayed in the place very long, he ate his foods, his meats, when it was the minimally cooked. So somehow he got the schus, this Ganav that we refer to him, Kamaichel ben Drusoi. According to Hananya, if the food reached the level of Kamaichel ben Drusoi before Shabbos, you don't have to put up a blech. There is no prohibition of Shehiyah. According to the Chachamim, no. The food has to be fully ready. To what point? It has to be so fully cooked that if it's going to stay on the fire longer, it's actually going to get ruined. And that's called mitstamek viraloi, in contrast to mitstamek v'yafaloi. Sometimes foods can be fully ready, but if they stay on the fire, they become even better. Supposedly, that's the case by cholent. It would be the maven. Where's the gabbai? That it's ready, but it will be even better. We're going to get into all of this nuance. The Seder here is not exactly the way it was organized in the Bavli, but today we are learning a daf of Hilchos Shabbos, and let's hit it right away. So daf Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph, all the way in the top, the Mishnah is speaking about two violations. One is if someone was ma'aser, if someone tithed produce on Shabbos, they violated an Isur Derabanan, or if a person cooked on Shabbos. In both of these cases, the Mishnah says simply, b'shoigig, you can eat it. B'mezid, you cannot eat it. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel says in the name of Rabbi Abahu. Now I know his words. You have to get used to the way they worded things. That b'shoigig b'isur, b'mezid b'isur. The way this would have been worded in the Bavli is that b'shoigig b'da oiraisa u'b'mezid b'da oiraisa. So interprets. Let's learn today the Rashirilio. Look inside the Rashirilio all the way on the top of the right. B'shoigig b'isur means what type of shoigig is when someone violated the be'isur Torah, which means that the mamish cooked on Shabbos, God forbid, which means, he gives an example. Person took a raw piece of meat and he put it in a pot and he put it on the stove. Or there was already food from before Shabbos, but what would be an Isur Doiraisa? To steer the pot. Steering the pot that has food in it, which is on a fire, when the food is not fully cooked, is part of making the food better cooked. That's prohibited mida oiraisa. That's why whenever we want to even, let's say, remove challah from the challah pot, even if the challah is fully cooked, we never open up the cover when it's on the fire. Even opening up the cover is a problem. We have to take it off the fire. Now we have a whole sugya of hachzara, of when are you allowed to put it back on the fire. And we have the 5 conditions, which we're not going to go through right now, even though this is something that people should review very, very often, not to forget it. But today is about shehiyah. Just putting it that the hachzara is another isur derabanan, but the case that we will give today for isur deraisa is putting food on the fire on Shabbos, steering the pot on Shabbos, or adding to the fuel. That's what our Mishnah is talking about. So if someone did any of these 3, either b'shoigig or b'mezid, v'chein b'mezid nami b'isur toira. So when Rabbi Shmuel says the words b'shoigig b'isur, he means our Mishnah is speaking about a biblical isur. B'mezid, a biblical isur. And what are we excluding from our Mishnah? This is important. Let's continue reading in the Rashirilio. Ulam utei shachach kedei al gabe kiddush ein grufel ktuma. If a person left a pot of food on the fire before Shabbos, when the coals then were not swept away, translating sweeping away coals or covering coals with ash in today's verbiage, without putting up a blech, without putting something on the fire, which serves to you, to me, as a reminder. Ooh, it's Shabbos. You can't, the way you normally would, manipulate, move around, open, steer, take, put back, Shabbos. So if a person didn't do that, let me use the words, the most lenient, kechananya, that what? And the pot of food that was put on the blech from before Shabbos did not even reach Kamaichul ben Drusoi. And let me add one final detail, which might not be relevant halacha l'maisa today, but we're not going to go on that path right now. And the food that is there is food that becomes readied over the next few hours while it's still Friday night. In contrast to large meat that you put on the fire before Shabbos, where there also theoretically you don't need a blech. But we're talking about the Rabbanan will be is that you did have fully cooked. The food did not have raw meat in it. Happens there also. What happens if a person left such a pot of food on the fire without a blech? That means the person here says the Gemara. So either you did it the shoygig or b'mezid or the bahu. No one differentiates between mezid and shoygig. No one is machalik between shoygig or mezid. What we said by heart, and we'll get to that in the whole daf and Amud Beis today. Then originally, the Chachamim said that if a person only even b'mei facto they can eat from it. And from there, ultimately, it was at times of Chazal, they said, you violated an Isur Derabanan. People take rabbinic law from ignorance, but they take it lightly. Even the shoygig, you cannot eat it. Bottom line is that when the Gemara comes back, when could we separate shoygig? You could eat it. Mezid, you cannot eat it. Only when you violated an Isur Doiraisa. Because when you violated an Isur Derabanan, shoygig and mezid, whether it was originally or whether it's ultimately, they will have the same law, either leniently or stringently. And Amar Rabbi Yossi, I'll prove it to you. Mishnah never said mevashel b'Shabbos doiraisa. Why are you differentiating? And this addresses what we asked. Why would the Mishnah put together in the same breath hama'asir v'hamavashel? Don't forget that we just learned yesterday. The Mishnah said before that you were toivel kalim b'Shabbos. Why wouldn't the Mishnah put together tfilas kalim and ma'asir in the same sentence, in the same clause? They are both rabbinic. Why are we juxtaposing ma'asir and mavashel? Now you know the answer. The Mishnah is alluding to that. Hama'asir mavashel b'Shabbos shoygig yoichel mezid lo yoichal. Again, you have to see how brief the Yerushalmi was, why did the Mishnah put it together? The answer is, there is never going to be a possibility of even a rabbinic prohibition when it comes to tithing if it happened before Shabbos. The only time that it's prohibited to tithe food is on Shabbos. So when the Mishnah says ma'aser, we're speaking about someone who did an act on Shabbos. And therefore, that sheds light that when the Mishnah says mevashel, we are speaking about someone who did the act of cooking on Shabbos. Shehiyah, which is prohibited midrabanan, kalev shehiyah means leaving a pot on the fire without having a blech on it when the food was not fully cooked. Shehiyah is something that you did before Shabbos. They're not alike, they're not the same. In other words, the fact that the Mishnah puts them together is a raya. How are they similar? One is ma'aser is midrabanan, mevashel is midoiraisa. I know that, but they are similar because it's about something that was done on Shabbos. If bishul was done on Shabbos, it's a isur doiraisa. In other words, bishoigeg beisur means doiraisa. Ubemezer beisur. That's great. Okay, so now bottom line is the Mishnah is speaking about a case where someone cooked on Shabbos, and the Mishnah made a very simple rule: if you did it b'shoigig, you can eat the food. If you did it b'mezid, you cannot eat the food. And we, by the way, we paskin in the Shulchan Aruch like Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir. We're going to see Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to see Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler, and then we're going to see Rabbi Shmuel ben Oishel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beruka. We're going to go from being relatively lenient to being very, very, very machmer. Another little detail is that our Mishnah so simplified it. The Mishnah didn't speak about you or someone else. Who can eat it? You or someone else. The Mishnah did not speak about you can eat it today or you can never eat it. None of this is clear. And that's the way Rabbi wrote the Mishnah. Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote the Mishnah very briefly. In other words, it still remains so much Torah Shabal Peh. There's so much you have to remember. The Mishnah is just a way for you to remember. The Braisas were more elaborate. Now we're going to learn a Braisa. This Braisa does not bring all of the four opinions. Most people are not even familiar with the Shita of Rabbi Shmuel ben Oishel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beruka. If I'm not mistaken, maybe people remember better. When we learned this in the beginning of Masechta Skira, we only had the three opinions. Many people say, I also remember that when I learned the Mishnah, that there are three-way machlokes tanoim. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, we pass like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. And indeed, the fourth is written in another place. It's really basically like Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler, plus, as we'll see. Okay, Tani we learned in a Braisa. Hamavashel b'Shabbos. Someone cooked food on Shabbos. In the Shulchan Aruch, just for the final comment, when Shin Yud Ches, when we begin with Hamavashel b'Shabbos, right away, if I'm not mistaken, the Ramah writes, V'chein kol Maisa Shabbos. Maisa Shabbos means any violation of any of the malachas that happened on Shabbos, with the only exception where we are more lenient is when it comes to carrying hoitzah. If you remember that hoitzah is called a malacha gerua, it's called a weak malacha, and we have leniencies specifically if someone de facto violated carrying something on Shabbos. But coming back, the focus here is on cooking. So if a person cooked food on Shabbos, Tanakama here is Rab Meir, mamish the words of the Mishnah, shoigeg yoichal. Now here, I got to do this. I know I'm going to complicate everything, but we have enough time and we have to learn this thoroughly. What does it mean you can eat it? Even you, the Rashirilio, or it's a middle of the right column, around 11 lines from the bottom, right in the beginning of the line. Shoigeg yoichal, hu atzmai, mamish lenient. Not only other people, you, the violator, you can eat it, and not only after Shabbos, uboy bayoim. Now, if you can eat it, guys, vadai, other people can eat it. The Rab Meir loikones klal, remember this line, shoigig otu mezit, and v'hachi muchach beperik kira. That's gavaldik. Now, next line, mezid, I'm back in the Gemara, back in the Braisa. Mezid lo yoichal. Here again, mezid lo yoichal means not you, not even anyone else. But now what? Never? No. Because if it would be never, Rabbi Meir would have said the words lo yoichal oilamis. Can't eat it forever. Rabbi Meir only writes the words lo yoichal, which means, says that Asherilio, you can't eat it on Shabbos, and you have to wait until, he writes, until when it gets dark. Now, the nuance of do you have to wait? Do you have to wait after it gets dark? In the beginning, that Asherilio doesn't write anything about it. But if you keep on reading, he shows you that even according to Rab Meir, you have to wait b'chdei sheyasu or b'chdei sheyeasu, however it's properly voweled, which means, let's say it takes to cook, whatever you cooked, it takes 20 minutes, just for an example. A guy did so deliberately. He knew it's Shabbos. He knew you're not allowed to cook. We don't want anyone to benefit from the violation. You know how you make sure no one violates from the violation? I mean, one way is to go extreme. You can never have the food. Rav Meir is not saying that. Rav Meir is saying you can't have the food on Shabbos, but you cannot have the food within 20 minutes after Shabbos. In other words, you can have it after 20 minutes after Shabbos. Because if you wait that amount of time, it turned out you did not benefit at all, you get it, from the violation of Shabbos. If you would eat it after Shabbos within the 20 minutes, then you still benefited. Because if you would have done it keheter, you would have began its cooking after Shabbos, you would have needed to wait 20 minutes. Here you're eating it in 10 minutes or in 18 minutes. I don't care. So just to know clearly, Rav Meir holds, b'shoigig, not only can other people eat it, you, the violator, can eat it right away. B'shoigig yoichal. Mezid lo yoichal doesn't mean never. It means that lo yoichal until it's dark. Until it's dark, really, b'chdei sheyeasu. And after that, even the violator could eat. This is why Rebbe was able to be very brief. It's accurate. B'shoigig, everyone can eat it. B'mezid, no one can eat it on Shabbos. And after Shabbos, everyone can eat it. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Opinion number 2. We paskin like the second opinion. Rebbe Yehuda Omer. Like this. If you did it b'shoigig, yoichal l'matzoi Shabbos. Who's yoichal l'matzoi Shabbos? Who has to wait? Not only the violator, everyone. What I'm adding takes time to see how you get that. You have to know a lot of information. So even the Baraisa that's more elaborate leaves it a little bit open, and that's why people sometimes they don't know the information. That's the information. According to Rabbi Yehuda b'shoigeg yoichal l'matzei Shabbos, even though yoichal is about the violator, he also includes in it no one can eat it on Shabbos. Everyone has to wait until Matzei Shabbos, and again, waiting until Matzei Shabbos means b'chdei sheyeasu, not immediate Matzei Shabbos, but you have to wait for the time that it would have taken for you to do it had you done it properly after Shabbos. However, b'mezid lo yoichal oilamis. Rabbi Yehuda does not differentiate between you and others, like Rav Meir does not differentiate between you and others. B'mezid, you and others can never eat it. And you see, lo yoichal oilamis implies not even b'chdei sheyeasu, ever. Much more strict. According to Rav Meir b'mezid, you can eat it after Shabbos b'chdei sheyeasu. Okay, that's second opinion. Third opinion, Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar Omer, like this: b'shoigeg, if you cooked it b'shoigeg, not only can you not eat it on Shabbos, you the violator, like Rabbi Yehuda, but you the violator can never eat it. Who could eat it? Only others after Shabbos. B'shoigeg yeyochal l'matzei Shabbos la'acherim v'loy loy. Meaning, the violator can never eat it. Loy b'mezid, if a person cooked it b'mezid, then loy yeyochel elamis loy loy v'loy acherim. I want to read here that Asherilio that explains something very important. Both Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, even in the scenario where it cannot be eaten, whatever that scenario is, the problem is a rabbinic problem, according to Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, both of them are in the agreement that midai raisa, okay, you violated. You did something horrible, but the food is allowed to be eaten. The Chachamim were the ones that began to say, hold on a second, we're going to penalize you. The main difference between Rabbi Yochanan and Asandler and both of the Tanoim prior says that Asher Ilyo on the left column, around 10 lines from the top. Again, it's around the middle of the Amid. The Mezid loy yoichal or yeyochel oilamis says that this is important for many other nuances, not lav dafka for our sugya. Lav mishum kinasuhu. It's not that we are penalizing, because if something is coming mitzad knas, then the one who did not violate should not get penalized. Which is really great. I want to go back to B'mezid. I think I said something wrong. According to Rabbi Yehuda, when Rabbi Yehuda says lo yoichal elamis, he was only referring to the violator. When Rabbi Yehuda says lo yoichal elamis, I stand corrected. That was a mistake what I made. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo yoichal ilamis, only the person that violated B'mezid. Others are allowed to eat after Shabbos b'chtei sheyasu. That's takadadin. That's how we paskin. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. By the fact that Rabbi Yehuda differentiates between him and others is a raya that why can he not eat it forever? It's a knas midrabanan. So it makes sense to say that we only penalize the violator. We don't penalize other people. Rabbi Yochanan Asandler, he's the one that goes beyond Rabbi Yehuda by saying that if it was done b'mezid, then loy v'loy achedim, not for him and not for someone else. That's why he has to add those words. Why? Because he holds that if a person did a Maisa Shabbos, it becomes an Isser Chefze. It's not that you did something wrong. Yes, you did something wrong. That made the product itself a wrong product. Elamishum, the Sfira Lei, the Maisa Shabbos, and again, Maisa Shabbos is not only bishul, it's any violation with the exception of carrying. Asurin bahanoya, kideisa, bepedik merubo, be'elonitis, etc., etc. This is very important. Okay. Now, says the Gemara that Shmuel, how did Shmuel paskin? Shmuel paskin like Rabbi Yochanan Asandler. The most stringent. What about Rav? So listen to the way you have to paskin dinim. Rav did not give the same psak din when he was speaking to his talmidim who were God-fearing and learned, versus how he would paskin when he would paskin at the pulpit or in a tshuva for the masses. It's a very important rule. And the reason is obvious. The reason is, you have to understand how halacha works, is that when people are not learned enough, ubeikir, if they're not God-fearing, even when in a limited area, in a certain scenario, halachically, we are theoretically lenient, people will misunderstand that leniency and they're going to apply it in other cases, or they're going to get an attitude of leniency, which they will apply in cases in which you cannot be lenient. And therefore, in general, for the masses, you have to be more machmir. And in private, you can be more mekel. And this concept, I remember even by the Rebbe, even not in halacha, the Rebbe speaking by a Fabrengen, he was speaking to the masses. The Rebbe had certain approaches, certain opinions about certain things. And many individuals, the Rebbe would give them a different opinion. And that's life, and that's life for everything. We have to have that type of seichel. Look inside. Rav, kad, have a moide bechavrusei. When he would speak, his chavrusas doesn't mean his chavrusas. It means his chevre. When he was teaching his talmidim, he would paskin like Rab Meir. And you know why he would paskin like Rab Meir? I'll tell you why. Because our Mishnah doesn't bring a three-way machlokes. Our Mishnah says, you're mevashal b'Shabbos, b'shoigeg yoichel, b'mezid lo yoichel. That's called a stam Mishnah ke Rav Meir. Whenever Rebbe did not even write divrei Rav Meir, he just wrote a din, and we know it's Rav Meir, it's Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Sandel, it's Rabbi Shmuel ben Shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruka. That's the way Rebbe is saying, I paskin like Rav Meir. Rav was a Talmud of Rabbi. He paskened like his teacher. He paskens like Rav Meir. But b'tzibura, he would go min hakotza la hakotza. There, he would pasken ke Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. And that helped people not have this lenient attitude when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, because he found that necessary at that time. Now, guys, times are different. Every generation has certain mitzvahs that everyone is very careful in. It's a generational thing. And other mitzvahs that people are starting to become lenient in. And the Rabbanim and the leaders of the generation, they have to know where to put together. And that's one way of putting it together. Amazing. Says the Gemara, regarding this, about how Rav paskend in private, how he paskend in public, there's another version of it. That Omar Rab Shimon bar Karsana, that when he paskend in public, he wanted to go stringent. He didn't pasken like Rabbi Yochanan ben Sandler. But really, there's a fourth opinion, like we mentioned, and now we're going to quote it. The Baraisa that we learned before either did not know of it, or it did not accept it at all, not even to quote it. But there is in another Baraisa, the Shita, the fourth most stringent opinion of Rabbi Shmuel ben Oishal ben Yochanan ben Bruka, that is based on the Nekuda, like the Rashi earlier explained, that where does Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler part ways from Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda? That Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, whenever they say you can't eat it, even Rav Meir says, B'mezid lo yochel. So we said it only means on Shabbos. Why can't you eat it? It's a knas. Which means even when lo yochel, me'ikra din, midoiraisa, you could eat it. Rabbi Yochanan ben Sandel argues in principle. He says that when there was a Maisa Shabbos, becomes asur bahano. Listen to the words. So Amar Rab Shimon bar Kasana, that when Rav would be teaching in public, Rabbi Shmuel b'noi shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika hoirilon. And where do we have his opinion? The Gemara found it. The Tanya Rabbi Shmuel b'noi shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, that listen to the rule. Kol davar shechayaven al zedoni kares v'al shgagosei chatas, which includes any violation of Shabbos, for the record. Now, there are other biblical violations for which, even, God forbid, if you did it, you're not going to get kares. You're not going to get skila. You're not going to be chayiv chatas. We're talking about the violations for which minimally there's a punishment of kares, which automatically means that b'shoigeg there is a obligation to bring a carbon chatas. If va'asoi b'Shabbos, and it was done on Shabbos, Rabbi Yochanan ben Sandler said that b'shoigeg he can eat it. Other people can eat it Matzah Shabbos. That's what Rabbi Yochanan. Other people can eat Matzah Shabbos. He can never eat it. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel B'noi says if you did it on Shabbos, bein b'shoigeg, bein b'meisid, asur bein loy bein la'acherim. Mamma mia. Never. That's it. Food is going to be completely, permanently forbidden to everyone. Now, that's based on what? Based on Rabbi Shmuel B'noi, accepting Rabbi Yochanan and Sandler's opinion, that if you do something b'mezid, it's asur doiraisa, it's asur bahano, it's asur doiraisa. So he just went one step further. What did he say? He said, if God says, if it's an isur doiraisa, if you did it b'mezid, someone might do it b'mezid, they're going to claim they did it b'shoigeg. So, kansina and shoigeg got to mezid. If even a mezid is a knas, then you're making like a double knas, a double the rabbanan. We don't go that far. But since he holds that if b'mezid it's a isur doiraisa, so he went just one step further. It's called kansina and shoigeg got to mezid. Turning daf chaf aleph amid base. However, kol davar she'ein chayaven al zudoinei kodes v'al shgagosei chatas. And by the way, doesn't only mean any rabbinical act. Even though we're going to come back to our rabbinical act, I just for the record, that there are some prohibitions, even on Shabbos, that is asur midei oiraisa. Give me one example, at least according to some opinions, but you're not going to be chayiv kares. Let's go according to Rabbi Akiva, that tchum Shabbos, I know it's a bigger tchum, that if you walk beyond the 13, right? I'm not talking about the 2,000 amos midrabanan. It's isur doiraisa, al yetze ishma mekoyma, according to him, but you're not going to be chayiv kares for that. Okay. Anyways, generally, if you violated the Nisur Darabanan, so that's why there's no Kadas and there's no Chatas, and it was done on Shabbos, we are referring to the beginning topic of today's daf. Let's focus on Shehiyah. You left a pot of fire that had food that wasn't even Kamachel ben Drusoi, Lechananya, or according to the Chachamim, it wasn't mitztamik varaloi, wasn't there, and you didn't cover the fire with the blech, you're not allowed to do that. So over there, b'shoigeg yeyachal l'matzoi Shabbos, and even that, this is like Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler, la'chedim v'loi loi, ubemezid, mamish like Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler, loi loi v'loi la'chedim. Notice what Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler says always. Rabbi Shmuel Benoi says only by Yisur Derabanan, by Yisur Doiraisa. It's a Rabbi Yochanan ben Sandler plus Kansinun Shoigig Otumezid. And Rav went all the way there. Rav in public paskin like Rabbi Shmuel Benoi Shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broik. Okay. Now, says the Gemara, Bo'oin kumer Rabbi Yochanan at ma'at Omar. How do you paskin? How do you paskin when someone was mevashal b'Shabbos? So Omar loin, ani ainli ela mishnah. Same thing that Rav did to his talmidim. I don't understand, he says. We have a mishnah, not a brisa. In our mishnah, Rabbi did not quote 3 opinions. He did not quote 4 opinions. He didn't even say that divrei Rav Meir. He wrote the mishnah anonymously. That's called, he was soisem the mishnah. When you're soisem the mishnah, that's because that's the halacha. Ani ainli ela mishnah. At, ma'at, you, me, ani, ein li. Yeah, he used the same type of formulation in his words, like people asked, hama'asid, v'amavashal b'shabes, b'shoigeg yoichel, b'mezid lo yoichel. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, Shomar Rabbi Chisda, it's ve'omar, but they swallowed the aleph, they economized on the aleph. What, you're so lenient? Hutru shabbosois. People will cook intentionally, basically, and they're going to say, Shogeg Hoyisi, if you're going to allow Rab Meir's lenient ruling to stand. Loi Kain, Amar Afuna B'Shem Rav, and V'Toni Rab Chia Kain. Now, guys, we are speaking here, amazing, now about the Rabbanon. The question that was asked to Rabbi Yochanan was Doirais, if you cooked on Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan was very lenient, right? B'mezid lo yochel, b'shoigig, even the violator can eat it. Now we're going to bring in an isur derabanan, and like we mentioned in the beginning of today's shir, that when a person violates shehiyah, what then? Even according to Rabbi Meir, we will see that initially they were more lenient, and ultimately they were more machmer. Let's read it inside. This is a case of shehiyah. If a person left a pot of food on the stove before Shabbos without today putting on a blech, in the cases where you needed to put on a blech, so initially they said, well, let's give it the same rule, the same psak of cooking on Shabbos. Why you're gonna make a derabanan more chamer than a doiraisa? B'shoigig yoichel b'mezid lo yoichel. Problem is nechshatu shoymanichin mezidin. People actually became lazy. They remembered you can't do it. They said, no, we'll leave it. Knowingly, they're doing something wrong. And then they would claim that we forgot. And they wanted to eat it. So the Chazal said, no. Ultimately, as we'll see again, they said that even shoygig is like a mezid, that you can never eat it. So you see that what? That when it comes to an Isur Derabanan, because of people's claiming shoygig koyisi, the Chachamim at some point, when people's observance went down, when people's Yerushalmi went down, they were more machmer, va'at, omar, hachi, hacha, hachin, and you're saying that if a person cooked on Shabbos, even worse, a doiraisa, you're telling me b'shoygig yoichal? And he says, exactly. Amar afhila, nechshatu liyos manichin, v'loy nechshatu liyos mevashlim. Yeah, exactly. No one was violating a Isur Doiraisa. We never stooped that low. Where you have a weakness is when it comes to rabbinic law. So since by Bin Rabbanans people started to be Moida Hetel Atzlam, it's only the Chachamim. I won't stoke the coals. So there, Konsu B'Maniach, it's called Shoygig Otomezid. But we never reached the point that someone is going to be violating Isur Shabbos b'mezid, such a person won't claim shoygig. God forbid, that person will, that person doesn't care anymore. But v'lei kosu b'mevashel, and that's a very important rule. And really, let's go back to Rab Chia. When Rab Chia was saying the Barishoina Hoya Oimrim, let's really go into all of the steps of what happened. That Chazru Loimar. Ultimately, they said, now, let me just quickly go back. The whole din of Shehiyah, which means that you can't leave uncooked food on the fire before Shabbos for it to continue to cook on Shabbos if the fire is not blecht, if the fire is not covered, or if you didn't put another type of heker. How much does the food need to be cooked for you not to need to put a blech? You will always need a blech for hachzara, but we're not talking about that right now. Meaning, if you take something off, you want to put it back on, aside of the fact that you can never put it down, aside of the fact that you have to have a mind to put it back on, you have to have a blech. That we know. But if you don't want to put it back on, at some point, you don't need to put a blech. What's that point? Chananya chachamim. Chananya k'maychel ben derusoi. We paskin leniently. However, what did the chachamim say? The chachamim say that the only time you don't have to put up a blech is not only if the food is ready. That's not enough. Because there are many foods that even as it stays on the fire, and just for the record, when something stays on the fire, where's the gabbai today? The longer it stays on the fire, the more it shrivels. Shriveling means mitzstamik. It condenses. Certain foods, when they condense, they become better. It's like an old man. All of us, we condense. You ever notice that? The older we get, the smaller we become. We become mitzstamik. Now, is it the yafala or verala? That's up to you. That's a choice that you make. So if you condense, but you not get better, that's also you need to have a blech. When do you not need to have a blech? If it's mitztamek veraloi, then you don't need a blech. Because if you're going to walk by the stove, you're not going to stoke the coals. You're going to take it off. You're going to take it off. Taking it off the blech is not an issue. Taking it off the fire is not an issue at all. Okay, so he says, Tafshel shum mistabek v'yafaloi is also asur. Even that, if it was left on the stove uncovered, even b'shoigeg, imagine. They said, no, you can't eat it because you'll do it b'mezid and you're going to claim you did it b'shoigeg. Only by mitztamik v'raloi did they permit it. And now let's give examples for the chefs. Ezeu tafshel shum mitztamik v'yafaloi. What type of food is that even though it's shriveling up, it's cooked already? Oh, Iran is also, I know someone told me that Iran is a great cook, and every time I speak about the gabbai, I insult Iran, I apologize. So let go. Kruv, cabbage, and va'afunim, peas, and ubasar taraf, minced meat. Minced meat is mistamik v'yafaloi. Just for the record, all of this is not like Chananya, very clear. According to Chananya, all you need is for the food to reach Kamaichel ben Drusoi, machlekes, half cooked, a third cooked. What about eggs? Now, why was the Gemara concerned about eggs? I'll tell you why. L'chur tzaraya, that they used to put eggs in the cholent. I skipped a piece, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm so very good. I'll give you more examples. You see that these great Amoyroim, they were chefs. So they're having a conversation over here. No, you missed Rashi lefasois, turnip tops, v'rashi kaflutois, and leek tops. They're also asu oisan ketafshu shum stomach v'yafaloi, which means that even if it's fully cooked, if you don't put a blech under its pot before Shabbos, which means you violated shehiyah midrabanan konsinon shoygig atumezit. And now the question is, what about eggs? Again, I really think that is because they used to put eggs in their cholent. Everyone had chamen because it's a mitzvah. Part of Oinik Shabbos is to have warm food on Shabbos. So having warm food Friday night is no big chachma. But having warm food Shabbos day, when you can't cook on Shabbos, demands for you to put something and leave it on the fire for many, many, many hours, which is what we call cholent. What those other Sfardim, they call chamim. And what about eggs? No, the question is that even if the cholent was put up a few hours before Shabbos, and therefore you can argue, if you don't plan to put it back, you don't need a blech, but if there's eggs in it, is it mitztamik raloi? Then you don't need a blech. If it's v'yafalei, then you do need a blech. So Rabbi Yossi b'shem Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Chanina b'shem Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. He says like this. He's quoting his father. He's Bet Rabbi Yossi. His father Rabbi Yossi Abba Ol Beisoy. My father once went to his house on Shabbos and he found over there shriveled eggs in the cholent, and they forgot to put a blech. Why did they forget a blech? Because the cholent was put up Friday afternoon. It was put up 3 hours before Shabbos, so it was fully cooked. Everything in there was allowed to go without a blech, but there were eggs. He found eggs v'osad, and he prohibited. There's one exception, and that is hot water. Hot water, if you leave hot, in other words, he needed the blech for everything. Bottom line. But hot water, you know what happens if you leave hot water on fire? What happens to the water? The water evaporates. That's the ultimate viraloi. No one benefits by leaving it on the fire. So Chamin, the only place where his father Rabbi Yossi was lenient is that if they mistakenly left a pot of hot water on the stove on Shabbos before Shabbos without a blech, there is where he was mated, because it's really not a good thing. The guy made a mistake. No one is going to do it. It's to your benefit to put a blech. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nasim b'shem Rucham Chanina. It's late. Abba, Aniva Abba, Aniva Abba. That mean why not Abba v'ani? I don't know. Alinu lechamas geder, and they heviu lefanenu, and they brought in front of us beitzim ketanos kichizaron. There were eggs that were so shriveled up, they were small as a certain type of apple that was very small. In other words, those eggs were on the fire in a pot for many, many, many hours. And v'tamoin yafe, and it tasted as good as kefin kirisin, like certain caper berry husks that are very tasty. So I know b'dedi havi uvda that eggs are mitztamik v'yafaloi. Just to mention that Rabbi Brud is also a master chef over here, so we have a lot of chefs over here. So this is a conversation that's okay to have as we have it in the Gemara. Now, Tani we learned in the Braisa. Let's go weiter. Loi tamale isha kedera sosiyois v'turmusin. Turmusin is, we know because it's mentioned a lot in Chassidus. Turmusin, right, that was part of the debate between Turnus Rufus and Rabbi Akiva, that turmusin is a type of bean that the way it's worded in Chassidus, it's so hard, it only becomes edible when you cook it, I think, for 7 times. It has to be extensively cooked. Similarly, must be this type of bean called asosiyos. So we're speaking about something that needs to be cooked a lot. And says the Braisa, v'titneim, a woman should not fill up her pot with these types of beans and to place them inside the oven Erev Shabbos while it's getting dark. Why is that? Because she might stoke the coals. Now that's a chiddush. Why is that a chiddush? Because one of the exceptions that we already mentioned right now, I'm saying theoretically, many current Rabbanim don't paskin what we're saying right now, and that is that if you put a raw meat in the cholent, let me speak about quickly a crock pot. I know it's late. Just for the record, a crock pot needs a blech. The way most people make a blech by the crock pot is that they have a piece of aluminum foil that protrudes in between the insert and the outer metal heater, right, keli. Or lav dafka, you have to cover the knob. Even by a blech, not everyone covers the knob, but that serves as, going back to the way they used to cover the coals with ashes or sweep it away, that covers it. So people, if you put up a cholent right before Shabbos, raw meat, that's the way it used to be. Some people say today, many Rabbanim say it's not that today, then you don't need to have a blech. So we're speaking about something similar. In other words, will you stoke the coals? Why, yeah, why not? If it's something that could be ready shortly after Shabbos comes in, that is where most people would stoke the coals if they would forget it Shabbos. If something takes so long to make that normally when you put it in the oven, you don't even think about it until the next day, that's where Chazal were not choishish that you'll be machata b'gecholim. So that's what they're talking about. That if you don't put it in the oven without a blech. The im the sana, then he answered it. Asurim l'motzoi Shabbos at kedei sheyei asu gevaldik. Because of Shema yechata b'gecholim. I know I wanted to go a little bit further, but it's really late. So we're going to pick up over here, God willing, in the next year. Masechta Shabbos, a little break from Masechta